The wind never forgets in Wyoming. It moves over the plains like a ghost, carrying with it the voices of those who vanished and the secrets of those who made them disappear. For 15 long years, Lisa Marie Kimmell's name drifted through that wind, unanswered, unanchored, unresolved. A young woman on a road trip that never reached its end. A bright light extinguished somewhere between the asphalt and the abyss. For more than a decade, detectives chased shadows, tire tracks, a witness who thought she saw a car, a rumor in a small-town bar. Each clue turned to dust under the Wyoming sun, until science, cold, clinical, and unflinching, breathed new life into a case long gone cold. It began with a semen sample, microscopic evidence collected years before DNA became the language of justice. Stored, forgotten, then rediscovered when technology finally caught up to the cruelty of the man. That sample carried a story, a name, and that name led to a man who lived not far from the very desert that had swallowed Lisa whole. His name was Wayne Eaton, a drifter, a loner, a man whose land was as barren as his soul. But before his name was whispered through law enforcement channels, he was already a legend of another kind. The man who kidnapped a family at gunpoint in the middle of the desert, tried to bury them alive, and still somehow thought he could bury his sins with them. The story of that day, a quiet stretch of desert, a broken down car, a family terrified, became a preview of the darkness that would later define him. It showed the world the kind of a man who could abduct, violate, and destroy without remorse, and then walk back into the sunlight as if nothing had happened. When investigators matched the DNA, the silence broke like thunder. 15 years of unanswered questions collided with one undeniable truth. Lisa's killer had a name, a face, and a past soaked in violence. And the road that ended for her in 1988 now pointed directly towards him. In this episode, we'll follow that evidence. From the sterile hum of the DNA lab to the barren stretch of desert where Dale Eaton's cruelty first revealed itself, we'll look at the man who hid behind isolation, survivalism, and paranoia until science dragged him kicking and screaming into the light. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from the living. Sometimes it comes from what they leave behind. Hey, Angela. How's it going tonight?
Hey, John, it's good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's good to be back. I know I keep saying that like every time and think that we're going to get back into...
We go through stints.
Oh, man, it's insane. It's like, you think it's going to go okay, and then it all goes to hell again, so...
It'll be all right.
But we do what we can. That's all we can do.
Exactly.
So, you know what's crueler than silence? It's when the answers are right there, buried under time, waiting for science to catch up, when justice isn't denied, just delayed.
For years, Lisa's case sat frozen in a file, a strand of hair, a trace of hope, but no one knew that evidence would one day speak louder than any witness ever could.
Then came DNA, the science that gave the dead a voice. And that voice pointed to a man who'd already shown the world what kind of evil he was capable of.
A drifter who once kidnapped a family in the Wyoming desert. Ballsy, tied them up, held them at gunpoint, and tried to make the sand their grave. A man who vanished back into the emptiness afterwards like a ghost that never stopped hunting.
This is Dark Dialogue Rocky Mountain Reckoning, the series where we return to the crimes rooted deep in the dirt and the snow of the American West, the ones that never left the hearts of the people who lived through them.
We investigate the stories buried under snowfall, prairie dust, and decades of unanswered questions, the ones whispered through dry creek beds, across the high plains, and beneath the weight of history itself.
Sometimes justice doesn't ride in with sirens. Sometimes it comes from a single cell and a man who thought no one would ever find him.
I'm Angela.
And I'm John.
And in this episode, we trace the path of a murderer hiding in plain sight, the forensic discovery that shattered 15 years of silence, and the story of a family he terrorized long before he met Lisa.
This is DNA and the Man in the Desert.
And this is Dark Dialogue, Rocky Mountain Reckoning.
The Wyoming desert stretches forever out here. Flat, hot, and silent. 40 miles west of Rawlins, there's nothing but wind, dust, and the hum of distant semis disappearing into the horizon. It's September 11th, 1997. A young couple, Scott and Shannon Breeden, are stranded beside the highway with their 5-month-old baby. Their van has died in the heat, and the night before offered no rescue, no water, and no sleep. Just darkness and the sound of the wind scraping across the sage. At sunrise, a faded green Dodge van appears on the horizon. It slows, pulls over. A man steps out, middle-aged, soft-spoken, polite. His name is Dale. Says his brother runs a repair shop in Green River. Says he can help. The Breedens climb in, grateful, exhausted, trusting. They don't know they've just invited a killer into their lives. In minutes, the highway disappears behind them, and the road ahead leads straight into the emptiness. So, before the Breedens ever crossed paths with this total piece of shit in 1997, his life had already carved a trail through the darker corners of the West.
Right.
It was a life built on instability, isolation, and violence, and one that repeatedly brushed against the unsolved deaths of women who vanished across the Great Basin. We've talked about it time and time and time again.
He's your favorite person.
He is quite the pile of shit.
Yeah.
The timelines, the locations, the methods, they all overlap in ways that were never coincidence. So we'll talk about his beginning. He was born in 1945. He was one of 8 children in
Really?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't know that.
in a Colorado home defined by abuse and chaos. His father was a violent alcoholic, known to smash bottles over his sons' heads. His mother, struggling with schizophrenia, once set fire to their house when Dale was just 16.
Oh, we love them.
Oh yeah, they're quite the punch. So home obviously wasn't a refuge. It was a battlefield. So by his teens, Eaton was running away, stealing cars, and fighting in the streets. So they sent his ass to reform school, Lookout Mountain in Colorado, a place that was meant to correct him, but it only hardened what was already broken.
Yeah.
The pattern was set. The damage was done. So after reform school, he drifted. He made one bad decision after another. And then he ended up marrying a woman named Melody, but that relationship was a storm of rage and volatility. And by 1986, she was gone for good. So was any sense of stability in this piece of shit's life. So he lived alone, slipping in and out of jobs, jails, and breakdowns. He was a man who couldn't stay in one place or one life for very damn long. Depression, paranoia, violence, they traveled with him like his damn shadows.
Right.
So by the late 80s, Eaton had crossed the border into Wyoming. He'd set up, this guy moved around all the time. So he was Colorado, Wyoming, Nevada, back to Wyoming, over to Colorado.
Wasn't he in Utah for a time?
I think he was in Utah for a time, yeah. So he ended up setting up a primitive camp, I guess is the best way to describe it, near Manita.
Yeah.
It was always described as a house. It wasn't a
Not
house.
so much. Yeah.
He lived in a bus. He scavenged for food, hunted when he could, surviving on little more than defiance and distrust. Neighbors called him strange and reclusive. The kind of man who spoke to himself and carried guns everywhere he went, which is not that unusual in Wyoming, let's be honest.
True. I mean, maybe not the speaking to themselves, but
Right, yeah.
except for me, I speak to myself a lot.
I do it all the time.
Okay, we're weirdos.
This is true, but we knew that. So it was during these years that his name and his movements began to intersect with something far more chilling. The Jane Doe murders that haunted the Great Basin through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We've talked about many of them. We'll talk about many more. But just kind of to run through a few of them, the Great Basin Jane Does and Amy Roll Bechtold. So between Elko County, Nevada, and the forested canyons of western Wyoming, young women vanished or were discovered dead, discarded in deep wilderness, in the deserts, bodies staged or concealed, their names, many of them, lost to the elements, and their killers officially unknown. So we've got Star Valley Jane Doe. That was the first one that we covered in this series. Like we discussed in that episode, she was posed nude in the sage, arms spread in a cross-like display.
Well, looked to be posed. You've argued that a little bit.
I have argued that, yeah. And then witnesses saw the blue Volkswagen that may or may not been related. It always comes up like it's this huge clue, but as we discussed in that episode, it really isn't, I don't think. Then we have Devil's Gate Jane Doe, also 72, also Elko County. And if you remember, her remains were extremely decayed by the time that they were found. But she was found east of Wells in country that was so remote that only hunters or wanderers passed through. Then Thousand Springs Jane Doe in 74. She was strangled and burned. We talked about her. She had an episode. Fox Park Jane Doe, who was found in 1980 near Laramie, Wyoming. She was sexually assaulted and severely beaten, left among the ruins of a ghost town, hidden within a dense wood. Her body was left for animals and time, abandoned only as the sun set behind the trees. We have Janelle Johnson. She had her own episode, and she was found buried along Muskrat Creek Road outside of Shoshone, and she'd been raped and bitten with a bite mark left on her shoulder, an obvious sign of sadistic control. And Del Eaton's travels place him moving through Fremont County all the time during the time that she disappeared. We talked about that in her own episode. We have Tanya Tiskey, who we will be talking about, but she disappeared. She was from Shoshone, Wyoming, the same place that Janelle Johnson was found. Tanya's remains were found months after she vanished in Idaho, and she'd been strangled and sexually assaulted, left in an isolated wild landscape like other victims. Wildlife and weather erased much, but not all of her story. Shafter Jane Doe, who will have her own episode. She was found beaten, shot twice in the chest, and again posed nude in a cruciform pattern similar to our first Jane Doe. And forensic testing found that she'd recently lived in Afton, Wyoming, and that's a town that Eaton frequented. Tire tracks pointed to a van or a pickup, both vehicles that Eaton was known to use. And then we've got Amy Roll Bechtold. 1997, disappeared in Lander, Wyoming. And she's going to have her own episode. She was a beloved distance runner and photographer. And I mean, she was an extremely talented runner.
She was Olympic hopeful, wasn't she?
Yes. And she disappeared while training on Loop Road in the Shoshone National Forest. Her car was found parked at the trailhead, keys and a list inside, but no sign of Amy. Only a partial sneaker print and some scattered belongings.
A list?
Yeah, we'll get into that in her episode. I mean, it's nothing important.
I don't want to wait.
But, I mean, they searched all over for her, and they never found anything, not even a sign of a struggle. They found nothing.
Yeah. That sounds like Dale.
Yeah. And for years, Fremont County Sheriff's Office just kind of focused in on her husband. I think it was a huge mistake. I really do. But they decided early on that her husband was the guilty one, and they pretty much discounted everybody else. But Dale Wayne Eaton was in that area at that time.
Yeah.
And we're discovering now, there's even more information apparently pointing to him being in the area at the time.
Just yesterday, even.
Just yesterday, yeah. And his brother later would tell detectives that Eaton was camping. They hunted elk up in that area, out of Lander. And his brother said that Eaton was up there camping when Amy disappeared. And the timing fit all the other suspected cases, the pattern of young women taken suddenly in places far from help and then never heard from again. And then there's additional ones, but in my opinion, those are the ones that match him closer than a lot of the rest. We talked about Naomi Kidder. She had her own episode. Glenda Mae Grantham, she's another possibility.
Right.
But I think there's some others that fit those better than this piece of shit. So, but all of these cases spread across a wild and unforgiving region bear the imprint of a solitary predator who knew how to hunt the margins, remote landscapes, isolated victims, and the patience to strike where no one else would ever bear witness. For investigators working on the Great Basin Jane Does and for the families still searching for answers, the echoes lead back again and again to this pile of shit. And the long shadow that he cast over Wyoming and Nevada's loneliest roads. So through the 70s and 80s, Eaton was always somewhere near these places. Working construction, running his welding truck, traveling around for odd jobs, vanishing sometimes for months.
Yeah.
When one brother was later asked where Dale had been in 93, the year of the Shafter Jane Doe, he answered simply, Nevada. And we know that I don't remember the weird shit, how they said that. It was his nephew, but it wasn't described as his nephew. Was with him in Elko in 93. So the same year, the same stretch of desert, the same silence after. And then by 1994, Eaton had bought a truck and was drifting constantly through Wyoming, Colorado, and Nevada. Everywhere he went, there were reports of women missing. We've talked about this over and over.
Yeah.
Hikers, travelers, locals. And when Amy Bechtel vanished near Lander in 97, again, this piece of shit's around, his name surfaces. He wasn't just a wanderer. He was a man who blended into the background of the American West. The mechanic, the welder, the drifter, the stranger at the gas station. The one no one remembered until it was too damn late. Dale Wayne Eaton's story isn't just one of violence, it's one of proximity. Always near the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong kind of past. His path wound through the same lonely roads where so many Jane Does were found, and eventually it led to one final road, the one where science would speak for Lisa Marie Kimmell. And we've talked about this before, but I think it's important to bring it up again in this episode. We talk about the psychological profile of the Great Basin predator. We know that he likely has a history of severe childhood abuse, both physical and or emotional, parental mental illness, poor attachment, neglect, likely to have exhibited early signs of conduct disorder or juvenile criminality, animal cruelty, theft, weapons offenses, assaults, whatever, frequent running away or truancy, social isolation, and poor academic performance. And then if we talk about their personality traits and mental health, we would see somebody that has pronounced antisocial traits, a lack of empathy, a disregard for social norms, very deceitful, sadistic tendencies, deriving pleasure from exerting control or causing suffering, staging and manipulation. Obsessive or ritualistic behaviors, signature posing or burning of victims, returning to the crime scenes. paranoid thinking, social mistrust, and periods of psychosis in adulthood. They would be very likely to have been diagnosed with a personality disorder, antisocial, possibly borderline, and possible major depression or schizophrenia. Talking about their lifestyle and mobility, they most likely live a drifter's lifestyle, frequent relocation, transient jobs, avoidance of any stable relationships. They'd have knowledge of remote terrain, skills in hunting, camping, or, ranching and jobs out on the plains. Ownership or frequent use of vehicles that are suited for rural travel, such as pickups or vans. Employment would most likely be manual labor, construction, or operating machinery.
Handyman.
Yes, welder.
Yeah.
And then if we talk about the offense characteristics, the victims are isolated young women, hitchhikers, runners, travelers, outdoor enthusiasts. The crime scenes are remote, difficult to access. Methods would most likely be sudden blitz-style attacks with extreme violence, shooting, strangulation, beating, with possibly some post-mortem staging. Forensic countermeasures using fire, water, or wildlife to obscure evidence. Retention of trophies, keeping the victim's belongings or clippings about the crimes. And then post-crime communication or taunting, leaving notes, reaching out to the family.
Yeah.
And then interpersonal and sexual dynamics. This person would have a history of failed abusive relationships, often marked by violence and abandonment. They'd have impaired sexual relationships or paraphilias, possibly erectile dysfunction remedied by violence, and would have a preference for controlling, humiliating, and or overwhelming their victims. And so when we look at Dale Wayne Eaton with this profile that we just built, we got to say that with the severe abuse, dysfunctional home, yes, he has an alcoholic and abusive father. His mother's a schizophrenic. We talk about the early violent criminal behavior. Yes. Assault, theft, sent to reform school. Social isolation, poor academics. Again, fits.
Yeah.
He had repeated runaways when he was a kid, really weak school performance. The drifter lifestyle, the rural expertise, again, fits. Yeah, he lived in a freaking bus. He moved all over the place, working odd jobs.
No schedule, just
kind of came and went. Yeah. We talked about the vehicles. He owned multiple pickups and vans over this course of time. And he lived in freaking Bonita, where you would have to have a vehicle, that could reach rural areas because it's freaking rural.
Yeah.
And then the victim selection, it definitely matches across the board with all of these victims. The blitz attacks, again, it matches Dale Wayne Eaton, what we know of him and what we suspect of him. The staging, burning, forensic evasions, absolutely. We know that he threw Lisa's body into the river. We know that he kept her car and buried it.
It's a big trophy.
Yeah, it's a big trophy.
Mm-hmm.
And we know now we're starting to think that he also potentially kept clippings about the crime. And we know that the son of a bitch did leave the note on her grave.
Yeah.
And then if we talk about the failed relationships, the sexual dysfunction, he was an abusive piece of shit with paraphilias, a history of threats and violence. And then we talk about the paranoid, sadistic, antisocial traits, and that has been noted by psychiatrists in jail and in prison behavior after he was incarcerated. So pretty much he matches what we would suspect the perpetrator in all of these cases would look like. So his background and behaviors fit almost seamlessly into the predicted profile of a predator responsible for these crimes. He endured a brutal childhood, cultivated survivalist skills, drifted restlessly through the same remote regions as his victims, and demonstrated sadistic violence, sexual predation, and signature post-crime actions, burial, staging, trophy keeping. His method reflects deep knowledge of wilderness, manipulation of forensic evidence, and the urge to control both his victims and the narrative aftermath. Hallmarks of the archetype found in Great Basin serial slayings. So, where the offender's profile calls for opportunism, calculated cruelty, and postmortem signaling, Eaton's known history matches detail for detail. His documented presence in victim regions, his violent criminal records, and his psychological profile all reinforce a chilling compatibility with the hypothetical Great Basin predator. A psychological profile for the predator of these Great Basin murders describes a deeply disturbed, nomadic predator shaped by a history of severe childhood abuse, social isolation, and antisocial personality traits. The offender likely had poor impulse control, enjoyed exerting domination and control over victims, and demonstrated sadistic tendencies not only through sexual violence, but also in possibly ritualistic staging, the use of fire to destroy evidence, and the choice of isolated disposal sites known only to locals or lifelong drifters familiar with the area. So this person's criminal behavior shows a progression: early violence and property crime, followed by growing confidence in remote abductions and extreme cruelty, often targeting vulnerable women alone in desolate places, the use of vehicles like pickups and vans, knowledge of rural terrain, and a pattern of trophy taking or revisiting the scene, leaving notes on the grave. All of those reveal a highly mobile and obsessive nature. Failed relationships, erratic work history, and social withdrawal deepen the portrait of a sexual sadist fueled by anger, abandonment, and opportunity. Wayne Eaton's life and crimes mirror this profile with striking congruence. His upbringing was violent and chaotic, with episodes of physical abuse and maternal mental illness. He spent his boyhood running from home and authority, ending up in institutional care. As an adult, Eaton drifted through Wyoming and Nevada and Colorado, taking odd jobs and living in remote makeshift shelters. He owned and drove the exact types of vehicles seen at or near some of the disposal sites. Evidence shows that he committed sexual assaults, practiced elaborate concealment, staged victims post-mortem, collected trophies, and left haunting notes. Eaton's interpersonal life was marked by failed marriages and a documented history of threats and violence, while psychiatrists found him to be antisocial, paranoid, and prone to psychotic breaks. So in short, Eaton fits this archetype of the Great Basin predator in nearly every dimension: childhood trauma, drifting lifestyle, forensic sophistication, signature violence, victim selection, sexual sadism, compulsive trophy taking, and post-crime attention seeking. His known behaviors and alleged presence at multiple crime scenes build a chilling narrative that aligns precisely with the psychological profile shaped by decades of unsolved wilderness killings. It's Thursday, September 11th, 1997. A family of three, Scott and Shannon Breeden, their 5-month-old baby Cody, are driving west across the country when their van breaks down in the middle of Wyoming. They were traveling from Michigan to Washington State, but somewhere along Interstate 80, about 40 miles west of Rawlins, their vehicle overheated and died. There's nothing around them but flat, barren desert. No landmarks, no houses, just wind and sand stretching all the way to the horizon. They spent the night stranded in that van. By morning, they'd been there almost 12 hours. The heat was unbearable. Their water nearly gone. A handful of cars had passed by, but no one stopped. They were exhausted, anxious, and desperate for help. Then, in the pale light of morning, a faded green Dodge van appeared on the horizon. It slowed, pulled over, and out stepped a middle-aged man. His name was Wayne Eaton. He seemed polite, quiet even. He told them that he was headed toward Green River and that his brother ran a repair shop that might be able to fix their van. It sounded like a blessing, and they accepted the hitch. Shannon noticed strange things right away. Eaton was mumbling to himself under his breath, constantly sipping from a thermos of coffee. He spoke little but fidgeted often, glancing toward the road and the mirrors. Shannon couldn't shake a sense of unease. She later said that she thought he looked like a serial killer, but immediately felt guilty for judging a man who, at the time, appeared to be helping her family. They drove west for a while, talking very little, when Eaton suddenly veered off the interstate at a narrow service road, an unmarked dirt exit meant for highway maintenance crews. He told them that he had to pull over to relieve himself. Given the amount of coffee that he'd been drinking, it made sense. Scott decided to get out too. The desert was silent except for the wind. Within minutes, both men were back at the van. That's when Eaton turned to Shannon with another unusual request. He told her that he was tired, wanted her to drive for a bit while he lay down in the back of the van. It was an odd moment. It wasn't even 9 a.m, but Shannon agreed. She got behind the wheel and started to accelerate down the dirt road, trying to focus on reaching the interstate again, but then she heard it, a metallic click from behind her. When she looked in the rearview mirror, her blood turned to ice. Dale Eaton was holding a rifle pointed directly at her husband and their baby. He told her to keep driving away from the highway and into the desert, or he'd shoot the baby. Shannon glanced down the narrow road and saw nothing but miles of desolation. No people, no cars, no help. And in that moment, something in her snapped into focus. She felt, she later said, in her bones that if she obeyed, if she took that turn deeper into the desert, none of them would ever be seen again. So she took action, pure instinct. She floored the gas and spun the wheel in a sharp, wild circle, trying to angle the van so hard that it would throw Eaton off balance or knock the rifle loose. Eaton lunged forward, trying to wrestle control of the wheel, rip out the keys. The van shuddered, stalled, and came to a violent stop. Scott grabbed Cody and jumped from the van. Shannon tried to get out too, but Eaton was already on her. He lunged, dragging her to the ground. The rifle fell, clattering against the dirt. That's when he reached under the driver's seat, pulling out a knife. Eaton slashed towards Shannon. She fought him, kicking and twisting, trying to get free. Then Scott, having set the baby safely aside, rushed back into the fight. He grabbed Eaton's arm, pinning it down, shouting for him to stop. Eaton threatened him, told him that he'd kill Shannon if Scott didn't let go, but Scott did not back off. Somehow, he wrestled the rifle up and swung it with all his strength. The wooden butt shattered against Eaton's skull, but even injured, Eaton did not stop. He tried to get up again, staggering toward Shannon. Scott lunged, tackling him. A fistfight, a struggle for control, both men rolling in the dirt. In the chaos, Scott got a hold of Eaton's knife and stabbed him in the chest. Eaton hit the ground. Shannon, now holding the rifle, fired a shot into the dirt beside him as a warning. Eaton, bleeding and still conscious, told her not to shoot again, that the gun would blow up and kill her. Scott continued striking Eaton until he stopped resisting, until the man who had moments earlier threatened their baby was now begging for mercy. When the dust settled, the desert was silent. Shannon grabbed their son. Scott checked that Eaton was no longer a threat, then ran back to the van. They climbed into Eaton's vehicle. It was the only one that still worked, and sped away down the empty service road. About a mile later, they stopped at a highway maintenance area and called the Wyoming Highway Patrol. Help arrived within minutes. The Breedens were shaken, terrified, and bruised, but alive. Their quick thinking and raw courage had saved them from disappearing into the desert that morning. What the Breedens didn't know then was that this chance encounter, this violent struggle for survival, would later become the key to uncovering something much darker. But on that morning in 1997, all that mattered was that they had survived. So when the Wyoming Highway Patrol arrived at that remote maintenance pull-off, what they found looked like something out of a freaking nightmare. A bloodied man lay in the sand beside a green van. His shirt was soaked in red. A rifle lay nearby, broken at the stock. And just a few yards away, officers found Scott and Shannon Breeden shaken, exhausted, and clutching their baby boy. And they told officers what had happened, recounting every moment, the kidnapping, the fight, and the desperate scramble to survive. And I gotta say, man, these people are freaking heroes.
Yeah.
They are freaking heroes. Have you ever been down in the Red Desert?
Yeah, once or twice, but I was really little.
I mean, it's like the Sahara Desert. It is just sand dunes for miles and miles and miles. It is a true freaking desert.
We kind of avoid that area.
Yeah.
But
and I mean, if somebody disappeared out there, it could be years if they are ever found. It is unbelievably remote and secluded. And so, and no doubt he was going to kill all of them.
Oh, yeah.
So as the police assessed the scene, they realized that the attacker, Wayne the piece of shit Eaton, was still alive. He was conscious, badly injured from the struggle, and he was losing blood. So they called an ambulance and began questioning him right there in the desert. When one of the officers asked Eaton why he'd attacked the family that he just met, his answer was strange. He said he was sick, dying, in fact, and that what happened that morning was a kind of suicide attempt. He told them that he had wanted to die, but didn't have the courage to do it himself. And so he described this as an attempted suicide by stranger. So even in this, what?
I said,
Yeah. So,
struggling to believe this.
Yeah, usually when you decide to commit suicide, you kidnap a family. I think most people
always
do, That's why we have so many families that just randomly disappear, because every time somebody wants to commit suicide, they got to kidnap a family.
That's why entire families always kill single suicidal people.
Exactly.
Too. All right.
Even in this fragile state, officers couldn't ignore what they found inside his van. Among the coffee cups, the tools, and just the general shit that he had scattered all over the place, the dude was a freaking pig. Mm-hmm. His van was nasty. His bus that he lived in, house, whatever you want to call it, was nasty. But in this van, under all the shit that was floating around, they discovered a set of handcuffs. And when they asked about them, he dismissed them casually and said that they were just a sex toy. There were other concerning items too, and things that didn't make sense to have in a vehicle headed across the desert.
Yeah, because that's where I keep my sex toys.
The officers knew then this was not a misunderstanding. This was a premeditated kidnapping. The Breedens were taken to safety, given water, blankets, and a ride into Rollins for debriefing. They were physically safe, but emotionally shattered. In interviews, Shannon described the feeling of that moment of standing beside the broken van and realizing how close they'd come to dying there. She said it was like looking straight into evil and walking away. Eaton, meanwhile, was stabilized and transported under guard to a nearby hospital. And once treated for his wounds, he was arrested and charged with multiple counts of aggravated assault, attempted kidnapping, and the use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. He ended up pleading guilty to the assault charges, but what came next still baffles law enforcement today. And me, too. And pisses me the hell off.
Same.
So despite the violence, despite the evidence, despite the trauma that this piece of shit inflicted on this poor family, Eaton received a suspended sentence.
I think we're going to need to get you a punching bag in here.
Maybe, and put his damn face on it.
And just interchange faces, because there's more.
This is true. So He gets this suspended sentence. He was sentenced to 2 to 5 years. He was ordered to spend up to a year at a pre-release center, essentially a halfway house
Yeah.
that was designed for inmate rehabilitation. It seemed unbelievably light considering what happened out there in the desert
Yeah.
and what would have happened if that family wouldn't have fought back. But at the time, it was treated as a near tragedy that had ended without death. A family had fought back and they'd survived. No one knew yet what Eaton was truly capable of or how dark his past really was, but it blows my mind that they didn't. I mean, for a man, a sick son of a bitch like this asshole, to grab a lone woman on the side of a road, that's really bad and bold.
Yeah.
To kidnap a family,
Right.
a man and a woman. I mean, the baby is easy to control. It's 5 months old. It's
Yeah.
not like he's going to fight back. But to kidnap a man and a woman, that really speaks volumes about what kind of predator this guy was.
Mhm.
And to me, is proof positive that he had done this shit before. This was not a one-off thing.
Yeah. He was not worried.
And the fact that the courts did not see it that way just blows my mind. I mean, just freaking blows my mind. So after the Breeden family kidnapping in September of 97, Eaton was arrested, like I said, assigned to the pre-release center as part of his suspended sentence. But instead of serving out his time, this piece of shit took off.
Of course he did.
After only a couple months, he left the facility and disappeared with his van. Law enforcement quickly issued a warrant and listed Eaton as a fugitive. He vanished into the vast and rugged terrain of Wyoming, which we know is extremely vast, remote, and rugged. And this began a period of several months on the run. So during this time, authorities had no idea of his exact location. Eaton's background as a drifter and his familiarity with isolated areas made tracking him exceptionally difficult. But it was during this fugitive period in the late summer of 1997 that Amy Roll Bechtel went missing near Lander, Wyoming. Like we said, she was a runner who disappeared while training in the Shoshone National Forest on July 24th, 1997. So years later, after Eaton became known for his crimes of violence and predatory behavior against strangers in wilderness areas, some investigators speculated that he could be connected to Amy's disappearance due to the circumstantial overlaps. He was camping in the region, and his criminal methods matched the sudden, opportunistic violence demonstrated in the Breeden and the Kimmell cases. However, there's never been any definitive evidence that have ever linked him to her case. And like we said earlier, she's still missing. She's never been found. So Eaton's time as a fugitive ended 3 months after his escape when he was discovered camping deep in the Shoshone National Forest near Dubois, Wyoming. Authorities found him living out of his van with a cache of survival gear and a firearm in his possession, which is very important because it was a direct violation of the terms of his probation.
Right.
He is a convicted felon who is now in possession of a firearm. So upon arrest, Eaton was charged with that, and this federal weapons violation led to his transfer out of Wyoming, thank God, because we just turned a son of a bitch loose, essentially.
Right. What was wrong with us?
A lot. I mean, there's a shit ton wrong with the Wyoming judicial system then and now.
Don't get him started.
So, but because of this weapons violation, like I said, it's very important. He was transferred to federal custody and sent to federal prison in Colorado. So after he was apprehended, he was incarcerated in the Inglewood Federal Prison in Littleton, Colorado. And prison records indicate that he was involved in the death of his cellmate in 2001 there. The relationship between Eaton and his cellmate had been contentious for some time, marked by frequent disputes and an escalating tension. And so one night, a violent altercation erupted inside their cell, resulting in the cellmate's death from stabbing and severe blunt force trauma. So following this incident, a detailed prison homicide investigation was launched. Witness statements and physical evidence showed that Eaton had attacked his cellmate during a heated argument. He'd used a homemade weapon, which prison staff recovered at the scene. Security responded swiftly, placing Eaton in solitary confinement while they started investigating the crime. And despite the physical evidence and Eaton's history of being a total piece of shit, authorities ultimately decided not to pursue a homicide conviction against him. And you explain that shit to me. You got two guys locked in
If I could.
room. One of them dies and one of them comes out. How is there a mystery here?
Yeah.
I do not get why he wasn't charged with homicide in this case, but he wasn't. Federal prosecutors reviewed the incident in detail. Witness accounts from staff and other inmates were at times contradictory. Some suggested that Eaton had acted in self-defense, claiming his cellmate was the aggressor and that Eaton feared for his life during the struggle. Others described a complicated dynamic within the cell, with both men demonstrating unstable and sometimes violent tendencies. Hence the reason they're in freaking prison. Additionally, Eaton's rapidly deteriorating mental health became a factor in the decision not to press homicide charges. Psychological evaluations characterized him as suffering from severe paranoia, delusions, and episodic psychosis, reducing his capacity to premeditate or to fully understand the consequences of his actions. Investigators and prosecutors concluded that, given the ambiguous nature of the physical evidence, the conflicting testimonies, and Eaton's diminished mental state, the case would not lead to a reliable conviction. And they opted to treat the matter through prison disciplinary channels instead of the criminal court. I struggle to get my mind wrapped around this one. I mean,
Yeah.
to use as the excuse that he's a criminal, which is essentially what they're saying. He's a freaking psychotic criminal. Therefore, we cannot charge him with being a crime. It's ludicrous to me. It's absolutely ludicrous to me. And it's ludicrous to me that you can have a guy that's in prison that all of a sudden becomes becomes legally insane.
Just suddenly.
But yet he was sane a couple of years earlier when we threw his ass in prison.
Yeah.
I just have a really hard time with this whole bullshit thing. I think essentially it was a prisoner killing another prisoner. They didn't want to waste the time or the money on it. So it's just like,
Whatever.
Well, one piece of shit killed another piece of shit. Not that I can argue with that part.
Right. But
Actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know what his cellmate was in there for.
true.
I don't know if he was a prisoner, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he was a total pile of shit. I mean, It was a federal prison, so could have been tax evasion or some shit for all we know. But I didn't research it. I'm sure that it's out there. It just blows my mind that he just gets off. He kidnaps a family. He gets off with nearly nothing. He stabs his cellmate to death. He doesn't even get charged. It's nuts. But he was punished internally. He lost privileges. He was transferred to a maximum security solitary confinement ward and became subject to increased psychiatric scrutiny. Though he was not convicted of homicide for the death of his cellmate, the violent event definitely reinforced his reputation as dangerous and unpredictable. And this incident remained part of his behavioral record as investigators examined his background in the years that followed. The reason that I said, it was very huge that he was caught with that gun and then charged federally for a felon in possession of a firearm is because by doing that, then the federal government collected his DNA when he was transferred to their custody. And as a direct result of that, in the late 90s and early 2000s, federal law and a growing number of state laws started requiring that convicted felons provide a DNA sample, generally by blood or a cheek swab, for entry into the combined DNA index system, or CODIS. And the FBI, and that's the FBI's national DNA database. This system was created to connect convicted offenders to evidence from unsolved crimes nationwide, especially violent crimes and sexual assaults. So once Eaton was convicted on the federal weapons charge, they processed him through their standard intake procedures at Inglewood Federal Prison in Colorado. And as part of this process, his DNA sample was collected and sent into CODIS. So separately, the 1988 case of Lisa Marie Kimmell's abduction, rape, and murder had, like we've been talking about, had frustrated Wyoming investigators for over a decade. And then, so for years, with no solid suspects, the advances in DNA technology gave fresh hope for solving her case. And in the late 90s, forensic experts in Wyoming, in the Wyoming State Crime Lab, re-examined the preserved biological evidence from Kimmell's rape kit and used newly available PCR-based analysis, and were able to extract a DNA profile from that evidence, and they uploaded it into CODIS as an unidentified forensic profile. So for years, that profile sat in the system unmatched. But then in 2002, after Eaton's DNA was entered into CODIS, the system triggered a hit. Eaton's profile matched the DNA that was collected from Lisa Marie Kimmell's rape kit, and this revelation immediately alerted state and federal authorities. So the DNA match made Eaton the clear prime suspect in Lisa's cold case, and once authorities had his identity, they re-examined his timelines, his travel routes, evidence, and questioned area witnesses like his neighbors and stuff. And further forensic examination linked him not only by DNA, but also by circumstantial evidence. Eventually, Lisa's car would be found buried on his property, which would provide another physical connection to her crime. So this series of procedural steps, federal conviction, standardized DNA sampling, the database hit, and subsequent investigations transformed Eaton from a convict serving time for weapons possession to the main suspect in a notorious Wyoming murder, and eventually to a convicted murderer on the strength of the unassailable forensic evidence. For 15 years, Lisa Marie Kimmell's case sat in silence. Evidence preserved, samples cataloged. A single vial of biological material kept sealed inside a refrigerated drawer, waiting for technology that didn't yet exist. By the late 1990s, the world had changed. Computers were now doing what detectives couldn't, comparing unseen traces of humanity across thousands of cases. CODIS, the combined DNA index system, became the digital meeting place for the dead and for their killers. And in a quiet corner of the Wyoming State Crime Lab, a technician uploaded the genetic profile of an unknown man, the one left behind in Lisa's rape kit, an entry without a name, a ghost in the code. For years, it sat unmatched. No alerts, no movement, just a line of data frozen in time, waiting for the right criminal to cross its path. Then came Wayne Eaton. After his arrest and federal conviction, Eaton's DNA was collected like every other inmate's, a sterile swab, sealed in a plastic vial, logged into a system that he never understood. That sample was sent off, coded, and fed into CODIS. What came next, no one could have predicted. Because buried in the endless noise of the database, the system finally spoke. And for the first time since 1988, Lisa's name had an answer. So, like we said, by the late 90s, they had isolated this DNA profile. They uploaded it into CODIS. And then when that hit came, it was freaking huge. So the CODIS team confirmed and this is just the way that it works. So it comes back and it says, okay, we've got a match. The computer says we've got a match, but they don't just go on that. As soon as they do that, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything everybody doesn't know, but they go back and they retest everything to make sure that it's a solid match. It's not some computer glitch or some bullshit like that. So they confirm that match through independent side-by-side laboratory analysis. So they took additional DNA samples from Eaton. They've got a search warrant to collect his DNA again, which they did in prison. And then they tested that again to the DNA evidence that was found at the scene. And it proved again, it was this piece of shit. So the investigative team immediately began reviewing his criminal record, looking at his movements, his property history, any connections that he could have had to Lisa. And a task force was assembled to pursue this new lead. Investigators obtained warrants to search Eaton's former property in Manita. And we'll be talking about this in a lot more detail in the next episode. But as a result of that search warrant, they discovered Lisa's missing Honda CRX buried in a pit on his land, which, I mean, it just sealed this all up in a nice little bow, you know? And so once the match was definitively confirmed, prosecution teams initiated grand jury proceedings. Lisa's family was finally notified of the breakthrough and invited to meet with investigators to review the mountain of new evidence, including the shock of the discovery of Lisa's car after 14 freaking years. The case then transitioned rapidly from a cold case with only circumstantial evidence to a full-on homicide investigation with irrefutable forensic proof, which tied piece of shit to the crime. Mm-hmm. So this DNA match was foundational. Not only did it solve Lisa's case, but it provided the legal leverage that they needed to pursue the highest penalties. Eventually, these would lead to Eaton's indictment for kidnapping, rape, and murder.
They're holding it very close to the vest because I cannot find the name of the person he killed in jail.
You know, you couldn't either. Because all I ever could find it referred to as an inmate. That's all I ever
cannot find it.
You know, just kind of a quick run through of the timeline. The DNA match happened in July of 2002. And then by late July of the same year, they were focusing in on his property. And on July 29th, they bring it was a freaking junkyard. It really was a junkyard that he was living in. But on July 29th, a search team began to excavate the property. And then on the following day, July 30th, is when they found her car, still displaying the Little Miss license plates. So August of 2002, through early 2003, they started building their case against this piece of shit. They're compiling all their physical evidence. They finally, at this point, they send the Stringfellow Hawk letter to handwriting experts to have them evaluate it. And then they come back and they said, yeah, it is a match to piece of shit. They also obtained statements from Joseph Francis.
Legal name change, you know.
Yes. It was a legal name change.
John has legally changed his name.
Yes. And then they obtained statements from a guy by the name of Joseph Francis Dax, who is an inmate who reports that Eaton confessed elements of the crime while they were incarcerated together. And his account did include details that were previously unknown to the public. I struggle with some of what he says because, according to him, Eaton was hitchhiking. Lisa picked him up, and then he made a sexual advance on her. She rebutted it, and that's when he decided to rape her and kill her. I find it hard to believe that a young lady driving across that barren stretch out there. I mean, I picked up a hitchhiker on that same road when I was probably like 19, and he reached like down by his boot. I think he might have been going for a knife, but I had a dog with me all the time, and he used to lay right up behind my head on the back seat. Mm-hmm. And as soon as that dude started to reach down, that dog was like in his lap, growling and snarling, and dude like freaking jumped up on the handle of the door and just kind of sat there, and the dog just kept him pinned right there. And so I was like, do you want me to pull over and let you out now? And he's like, yeah, would you pull? Yeah, would you let me out?
Your ride's over now, dude.
So I kicked his ass out. I mean, definitely no, I can't say that. I've picked up a couple other hitchhikers in my life, but
you need to stop that.
Really made me cautious about picking up hitchhikers after that.
Yeah.
And I have no clue if the dude, had bad intentions or not, but I trust my dog's intentions.
The dog was like, no.
Yeah. And he did not do that. That dog was not that way. So I don't know what was up, but I think something was probably up. But I only bring that up because I saw him walking out there, and I'm a big guy, and when I was 18, I was a big, strong dude, right? And so, but even then, I was like really reluctant to pick him up. And if I wouldn't have had the dog in there with me, I don't think I would have.
Sorry, dude. Yeah.
And so my point is, I find it hard to believe that this young teenage girl is driving. You've driven across between Casper and Shoshone at night.
No.
It's like pitch black. There's not a freaking street light to be seen anywhere. It is black as black can be.
Yeah. And I know back then there wasn't cell phones, but now, like, as soon as I have service, I'll call for somebody who's walking.
Right.
But I'm not picking you up.
No. Yeah. And
I'm sorry.
She might have waited. Well, it's pretty much the same as far as service and whether you wait to Shoshone to call, because that's about when you get service back.
Yeah.
But, she might have went into Shoshone and made a call that somebody was, I don't know, Lisa. I never met her. I just find it hard to believe that she would have done that. But it's neither here nor there. That's what his cellmate, that's the story the cellmate told. But he did have other information that nobody should have known.
True. Okay.
So it's possible, though, that, these pieces of shit tell these stories. And I think that he probably grabbed her from the rest area near Manita.
Yeah.
But when he's telling his prison buddy, it probably sounds better that he took the moves on her or whatever. So I don't know. I'm not saying that the guy was lying. It's very possible that Eaton lied to him and he was just recounting what he was actually told. So, but by April 2003, the piece of shit is extradited from federal custody in Colorado to Natrona County, to the Natrona County Jail back in Wyoming. And on April 17th of the same year, the formal criminal information is filed. Eaton is charged with 8 felonies: first-degree premeditated murder, aggravated kidnapping, robbery, first and second-degree sexual assault, and more. Then the court denies bond. Thank God they get it right. It didn't turn him loose to like a freaking pre-release center or something. And, obviously they cited the flight risk. The son of a bitch has already fled custody. So no, piece of shit, you don't get out of jail this time. And the prosecution, which was led by the Natrona County DA, Kevin Meenan, signals their intent to seek the death penalty. We'll go through all of the intricacies of the trial and everything that would come, because we still got quite a bit to talk about. So her mom, Sheila, who had devoted herself to advocacy and outreach in Lisa's memory, was initially stunned and overwhelmed by the news. I can't even imagine.
No doubt.
After years of living with this uncertainty, it would have to be like a mixture of relief and disbelief, and then a whole renewed pain.
Mm-hmm.
You got to go through the whole thing again.
Yeah.
And now you have a face of this freaking monster, and he's not a handsome cat. Let's just say that.
No.
And so somebody thinking about their daughter's last days with this freaking animal.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't imagine it. Lisa's younger siblings also struggled with the reality of the DNA match. They were haunted by possibly having to confront their sister's killer in court. Lisa's father, Ron, and other close relatives gathered as a family to process the news, checking on each other as the investigation intensified. And, so often is the case that it's really not even discussed or thought about what the family is going through at that time. Like, of course, they're freaking ecstatic and relieved that they found the guy, but it's almost like going through the whole thing all over again.
It's the epitome of bittersweet.
It really, really is, and everybody, I just don't think enough attention gets put on that after 14 years, a lot of healing has taken place.
Yeah.
And, I don't think you ever are healed from this.
No.
I don't think you ever get closure, but a lot of that has taken place.
Yeah.
And then it's just ripped open and fresh as the freaking day that it happened.
What you're looking for, I think.
Yeah.
They've
accepted it, started to kind of build their life on from it. Sheila, her life completely changed. I'm sure it did for the entire family, but for Sheila, it really changed because she really became an advocate. She wrote that book and she would speak out about violence against women and the importance of robust forensic investigations in cold cases. I mean, we talked about the fact that they were very disappointed with the way this investigation was handled early on. And she was an advocate against that, and she really was out there advocating for her daughter. Lisa's case had always galvanized the family, the Kimmell family. But in the months between the DNA match and Eaton's trial, they navigated it in an intensely public way. And maybe because we've talked about her case was huge. It was on every news station. It was on every paper. It was on Unsolved Mysteries. It was a big, big national case.
Yeah.
And so as soon as the DNA match hit, here come the freaking reporters wanting all the interviews and all of that kind of stuff. And Sheila would later say that, quote, "We were overwhelmed. We had waited so long to hear those words. And when they finally came, I couldn't even speak. Finally, there were answers, but it was also the beginning of something new, facing the man that took our Lisa and letting the world know exactly what he did," end quote. So, I mean, that just really, and then the shit that came out in court, that now they knew where she was kept and tortured and the evil shit that he did. I mean, it's unbelievable to even think about. It really is. It's just so tragic and so sad. My heart just goes out to these people. Even today, they're still suffering from this, of course, just like everybody that loses a child, but especially in such a violent and awful way.
Yeah. Despicable.
To say the least, yes. For 15 long years, Lisa Marie Kimmell's case sat suspended in silence. Evidence sealed, leads gone cold, hope stretched thin by the weight of time. And then a fragment of her story, microscopic and forgotten, became the thread that unraveled everything. A single DNA profile, pulled from evidence that had waited longer than some of the detectives themselves had been cops. When it hit in CODIS, the screen lit with a name that changed everything. Wayne Eaton, the man who nearly killed a family in the Wyoming desert, the man who believed isolation could hide the truth forever, the man whose crimes finally collided with science. That match was a spark. It transformed years of rumor and grief into fact. Lisa's killer had a name, a history, and a record soaked in violence. The Wyoming State Crime Lab had done what time could not. They gave Lisa back her truth. And from that moment forward, the walls around Eaton's secrets began to crack. Investigators retraced his path from Anita to Rollins, from Elko to Lander, and everywhere he'd ever lived or drifted, there were whispers of missing women, stories of tempers and unexplained disappearances. Each step they took exposed another layer of his deception, a man who wore loneliness like a camouflage. But the most haunting echo of Eaton's violence wasn't found in Lisa's case file. It was still living in the memories of the Breeden family who had met him face to face a decade after Lisa had vanished. In September of 97, Scott and Shannon Breeden were just a young couple on the road, exhausted, overheated, trying to get home with their baby boy. A simple breakdown, a stranger offering help. It could have been any family on any highway in America. But that moment, that single choice to trust a quiet man in a faded green van, nearly ended 3 lives. Eaton had done what predators always do, hid his intent behind ordinary kindness. He used his calm voice, his polite tone, his practiced helplessness to lower their guard. And in seconds, that illusion shattered into terror. When he pulled the rifle, when he turned the quiet of the desert into a prison of fear, the Breedens had every reason not to survive. But they did. Not because he showed mercy, but because they refused to die. Because Scott fought back. Because Shannon trusted her instincts. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move anyway, even when you know it might be the last thing you ever do. Their quick thinking and raw willpower not only saved their child, it exposed the monster who'd been hiding in plain sight. If they hadn't fought back, Dale Eaton's name might have never entered the system. His DNA might never have been taken, and Lisa's case might still be sitting in a cold drawer in the Wyoming State Crime Lab, silent, unsolved, unfinished. The Breedens didn't just survive that morning in the desert, they changed the trajectory of justice. Their survival became the key that unlocks someone else's truth. And that's the thing about stories like this. The connections are often invisible until time forces them into view. A young woman in 1988, a young family in 1997, both caught in the same orbit of evil, both defining what it means to fight for life, even when death is already reaching out its hand. The Breeden survival reminds us how thin the line can be between tragedy and triumph, how easily one more name could have been added to the list of souls in the Wyoming desert, and how sometimes survival itself becomes an act of justice. For Lisa's family, the DNA match brought heartbreak and relief in equal measure. It confirmed what they'd feared all along, that she didn't just vanish, she was taken. But it also gave them one thing that they'd been denied for 15 years, the truth. The truth would soon lead investigators to Eaton's property, to the patch of land where he'd lived alone, surrounded by junk and secrets. There, under a sheet of dirt and rusting metal, the desert was still holding Lisa's last chapter. And when the ground finally gave it up, there would be no more hiding, no more theories, no more doubt. This is where the silence began to end. And in the next episode, we'll follow the people who dug through the layers of earth and horror to find what Eaton thought he'd buried forever, the final piece of the puzzle that brought Lisa Marie Kimmell home. The silence that followed Lisa's death lasted for years. Too many nights where her name was whispered into the dark without an answer. Too many birthdays marked by what ifs instead of candles. And yet, somewhere in that quiet, the truth was waiting, preserved in a single strand of DNA. When the scientists finally matched that code to a name, it was as if Lisa herself had found a way to speak. No courtroom could silence her. No buried car or vanished evidence could erase her. Her voice, carried not in sound but in science, reached across 15 years to say what the living could not. I was here. I mattered. And this is who did it. That moment was more than a match at a database. It was justice coming back from the dead. It was proof that the smallest fragment of a person can carry more power than the lies that tried to bury them. For her family, it meant that the ache finally had a name. For her mother, Sheila, it meant that all those sleepless nights, all those phone calls, all those prayers whispered into a world that never seemed to answer, had finally been heard. For Lisa, it meant she was no longer a mystery. She was once again Lisa, the daughter, the friend, the bright young woman whose story was stolen but never lost. And woven through that truth was another story, a reminder of how close the world came to repeating itself. In 1997, when the Breedens family broke down in the desert and accepted a ride from a man they didn't know, fate circled back to the same darkness. Wayne Eaton, the same man who had taken Lisa's life 9 years before. Only this time, the ending was different. Scott and Shannon Breeden fought back. They saved themselves, their baby, and unknowingly the path to Lisa's justice. Because when Eaton went to prison for the attack, his DNA was taken, and Lisa's name finally found its answer. Survival and justice, two threads of the same fragile fabric. The Breedens lived because they refused to die. Lisa's case was solved because she refused to be forgotten. That is the paradox of tragedy. Sometimes the living and the lost share the same story. One becomes the voice for the other. One survives so that the other can finally rest. Lisa's legacy is not the violence that took her. It's the truth that found her. It's the family that carried her memory when the world went quiet. It's the courage of strangers who crossed paths with the same evil and lived to make sure that it could never hide again. She will always be Lil Miss, the daughter who should have made it home, the young woman whose smile still softens the edges of every word spoken in her name. Her story is written now, not just in headlines or files, but in the hearts of those who still carry her light. And as we move closer to the place where her final secret was buried, we remember the truth is patient. It waits beneath the dust, beneath the silence, until someone cares enough to dig it up and hold it to the light. In the end, justice didn't come from a witness or a confession. It came from a code, a sequence written in blood, held in silence, waiting to be found. For 15 years, Lisa's voice was quiet, and then science gave it back to her.
Her name carried across time because someone, somewhere, cared enough to preserve the evidence. Because investigators refused to throw it away. Because a family refused to stop asking why.
If this episode meant something to you, take a moment to like, follow, and leave a review wherever you listen. Those small actions help more than you think. They keep these stories in the light.
You can also share this episode and join us at darkdialogue.com, where you'll find case files, photos, and updates from across the Mountain West. There you can be part of the Dark Dialogue Collective, a volunteer network committed to research, advocacy, and remembrance.
You can support the work directly through Patreon or make a one-time contribution on Ko-fi. Every dollar funds the field work, records requests, and long nights it takes to tell these stories right.
Subscribe to our Substack at darkdialoguecrime.substack.com for transcripts, behind-the-scenes notes, and deeper investigative context from the team. And for real-time discussion, join our Discord community. You'll find the link in our website.
If you've got a story tip, a case connection, or just want to reach out, email us at info@darkdialogue.com. We read every message, and we never forget the names that we cover here.
This has been Dark Dialogue, Rocky Mountain Reckoning. I'm Angela.
And I'm John.
We'll see you next time when a buried car and the land itself reveal what time tried to hide.
Until then, the jury of history never adjourns. Let the past take the stand, and the guilty face the reckoning.